That gave you an opportunity to turn to Matthew 2. How about that? So we got a lot of ground to cover today, so let's go ahead and just jump in. So hang on, buckle up. Matthew chapter 2. I love this story. The theme this month is the light of the world, and there is a light involved, two lights involved in this story today. But let's just go ahead and jump right in. Verse 1, we're going to read 1, 2, 3 verses at a time, then we're going to stop and talk about it and kind of work through it. So hang in there. Verse 1, now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem. All right, stop right there. Let's talk a little bit of history. We know there are some characters that we've been introduced to here in this verse 1. Jesus, we're more familiar with, pretty familiar with him, especially Luke 2, Christmas time story. We're familiar with that. So let's talk about Herod and the Magi. Maybe a little bit less familiar with them. Let's talk about Herod. Herod was a Jewish man. Well, actually, he was not Jewish, but spoiler alert, we'll get to that. But he was a man in Judea, and he was the son of an official in the court of the Roman-backed king of Judea. All right. Herod became a governor in his mid-20s. So he had political aspirations. He was very aggressive. And Herod became governor in his mid-20s. And in 40 BC, under the Roman Empire, another empire came in to lay siege to Jerusalem. Now, the Roman Empire back in that day, if there were Olympic Games for world empires, they would be gold medalists. They were the gold medal standard back then. But there was another empire called the Parthians. The Parthians were kind of centered around modern-day Baghdad, took in Iraq, Iran, all the way over to Afghanistan, and over to the Middle East where Judea was. So the Parthians were, let's call them second place silver medalist in the world-dominating empire game. All right? So the Parthians and Romans never got along. About 40 BC, the Parthians came into the Roman-backed area of Judea. They laid siege to Jerusalem. The king, Hyrcanus, and Herod and his brother were the two governors. They didn't know exactly what to do. The siege had been laid, and the Parthian leaders said, hey, we got an idea. This is going to work. Hey, why don't the three of y'all, I'm paraphrasing, why don't the three of y'all come outside the walls and come into our camp, and we'll have talks about how to have a peaceful resolution to this whole mess. Now, Herod smelled a trap. Herod had set a bunch of traps in his life. And listen, he was not a good human being. But he knew enough to smell a trap when he saw one. And so the king, though, and Herod's brother thought it was a great idea. Let's get peace out of this. So they left Jerusalem walls and immediately were imprisoned by the Parthians as soon as they went into camp. And then the Parthians installed their backed king in Jerusalem. Well, Herod, he's sneaky. He got out of Jerusalem and he went back to Rome. Hang on, this story's going somewhere. He goes back to Rome where he meets somebody named Mark Antony. He meets another guy named Octavius. And the Roman Senate wants control back in Judea. They don't want Parthia to gain the upper hand regionally in that theater, so they proclaim him immediately in the Roman Senate, you, Herod, are king of the Jews. 3 years later, in 37 BC, Herod returns with a massive Roman army at his back, and they retake Jerusalem, and Rome installs Herod as king of Judea. Over the next 3 decades, there were a lot of issues, a lot of family infighting, backbiting, political intrigue. Herod was known to murder his own family to stay in power. He had multiple trials where he had to explain himself to Mark Antony, and he always found a way to talk his way out of trouble. Know people like that? Always talked his way out of trouble. And then when Octavius defeated Antony, he had to convince Octavius of his loyalty to stay in power, which he did, but you don't know Octavius by that name. You probably know Octavius by his imperial name, Caesar Augustus. It's that Caesar Augustus from the census in Luke 2. So that's the context. That's Herod. But what about the Magi? What do we know about them? Well, the good news is there is actually a lot of information in the historical record about who Magi were, what they did, why they were there. Now, that doesn't help us with the names of the Magi in our story, although people have come up with names for them. Doesn't tell us how many there were, although tradition holds 3, but we don't know. But what we do know is who these guys were and what they did. They were, at that time, based in the Parthian Empire. They were wise men. They were astronomers, astrologers, part of the priestly caste. So how and why would Magi from the East, how would they know about a Jewish prophecy about a coming Messiah around and in Israel? It'd be nice, wouldn't it? I mean, historically, it'd be nice if we could put Magi and Jewish scholars and experts in the same room together. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that kind of tie it up with a bow, being Christmas time? The good news is we can. And the best news is we can do it in Scripture. Turn to Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, you have a group of Jewish exiles who have been taken to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream that he can't interpret. None of his Magi can interpret it either. They're stumped. Their lives are actually in jeopardy. And here comes this young Jewish exile named Daniel. Daniel, through the power that God gives him, interprets the dream. And this is Nebuchadnezzar's response, Daniel chapter 2, verse 46. Then Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and paid humble respect to Daniel and gave orders to present to him an offering and incense. The king responded to Daniel and said, "Your God truly is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, since you have been able to reveal this secret." Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon, and here it is. He made him chief prefect, head, over all the wise men, Magi, in Babylon. Daniel was head of the Magi. Where would these guys, a few hundred years later, gotten the idea that a Jewish Messiah was going to be born in Judea? Very likely, I think I can make a pretty strong case that it came from Daniel telling them to follow the prophecies. Okay, so you say, well, what prophecies would those have been? That's a great question. Scholars debate that. Probably refers back to a prophecy from the book of Numbers. Balaam, remember him? Interesting story, but that's a different sermon. But Balaam gave a prophecy to the people coming out of Egypt to the promised land. And in Numbers 24, verse 17, this is probably the prophecy they were looking to and thinking about when they were searching for the star. It says, "I see him, but not now. I look at him, but not near. A star shall appear from Jacob." That's interesting. "A scepter shall rise from Israel." Now, stars, the ancients held that the stars indicated astral phenomena, would indicate the presence of the divine or the influence of the divine on human history. So a star appearing from Jacob, that's a key point. And a scepter, well, scepter is what kings use. That's to rule. So a divinely appointed king of the Jews was going to be born, probably what the Magi were referring to. But let's get back into Matthew chapter 2. All right. Where is he They're in Jerusalem now. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled. I think that's an understatement. And all Jerusalem with him. Herod, he's known as Herod the Great. He restored the temple. He built massive palaces. He did a lot of public works for the people of Israel. But he was a horrible human being. Historically, if you ever hear somebody named something the Great, probably some history there. Okay? So Herod the Great had history there. He was not a good human being by any stretch. So these magi had been looking for this king, and they come into Jerusalem. Herod hears about it, and he's troubled. When a horrible human being who has the power of control over your lives gets stirred up, guess what? You're going to get stirred up, okay? And the entire city was. But I also think the Parthians, these magi, I also think they had a little dig on him. Because why was Herod panicking? Think about it. Why was Herod panicking? Herod was not a blood-born Jew. Herod's father was Edomian, which is from Edom. He's an Edomite. So Herod's lineage from his dad was Edomian through Esau. The promise was through Jacob. Remember Numbers 24:17, a star will rise from Jacob. So he's in trouble. Well, you say, well, you know what about Herod's mom? Well, Herod's mom was from Arabian descent, so no luck there. He's not a blood-born Jew. So if a blood-born Jew is born with royal right to the throne, he's out of a job. Herod doesn't like being out of a job. He wants to stay in power. And I do really believe that's why the Magi threw that dig in there in verse 2. Where has he who has been born King of the Jews? Because you sure weren't, Herod. Parthia has an opportunity to destabilize this region again. If they can back the right king, if they can find him. Let's keep going. Verse 4, and gathering all the chief priests and scribes of the people, Herod, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, for from you will come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So if the threat is real, who does he ask? The religious leaders. Members of the Sanhedrin, members of the ruling council. He asked them, and I find it interesting, sometimes in Scripture, what you do see is important as what you don't see. What you don't see here are the scholars running to say, you know what, be back, just be right back, hold on, give us some time, we're going to go look the Scriptures and find out. You don't see that. You see them with an immediate response. They immediately respond, well, he's going to be born in Bethlehem of Judah. Everyone knows that. I mean, they didn't even have to leave anywhere. They said, oh, Herod, he's going to be born in Bethlehem. Didn't even have to leave. The irony here, I think, is that the Gentile Magi were paying more attention to the coming of the Christ than the Jews were. The scholars, the ones who should have been looking for him intently. Verse 7, then, after Herod heard that, Herod secretly called, he's good with those secret meetings, man, Herod and those closed-door meetings. Herod secretly called for the Magi and determined from them the exact time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. And when you've found him, report to me so that I too may come and worship him. Look, Herod's not accidentally on the throne, okay? I love this. Look, the Parthians are no dummies either. But I just love how he says, hey, guys, just out of curiosity, when did you see the star first? Just asking for a friend, just trying to figure it out. So they told him, and he sends them to Bethlehem. Verse 9, after hearing the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star, which they had seen in the east, went on ahead of them until it came to a stop over the place where the child was to be found. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. So they went from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. And you might think, well, did they have to pack a lunch? I mean, how far is that? Some of you have been on that trip and been on that road. I've been down that road, literally. It's 5 miles. It's like if you want to leave here today and go up to Coles, about that long. Or if you want to leave here today and go down to Eastman, it's about that far. It's not far at all where the Messiah was born. So what was the star? That was another thing over history that people have been debating about. What was it? And some scholars, and these are all reputable scholars, depending on who you ask, but many scholars think maybe it was a planetary alignment. Okay, I'd go for that, planetary alignment. Some say it was maybe a supernova that kind of directed the light down. Some say it was a comet. Maybe. There's others who say that maybe it was a supernatural occurrence of the Shekinah glory of God. Kind of like the pillar of cloud led the Hebrews out of Egypt through the wilderness. Pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night. Maybe it was that kind of light that guided the wise men on their journey. We don't know for sure exactly what it was, other than it was supernatural and supernaturally directed. That's the main thing in the story. It's not exactly how, but who. Who was directing this story? And it's God. So that's kind of the star. We don't have to know exactly what it was, but we know that it showed up again and led them directly to Bethlehem, where the child was. And the Magi were overjoyed, and this being, the third week of Advent, the week of joy, right there in verse 10, when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. The text literally says they rejoiced with a mega joy. They couldn't have been more joyful than they were at that exact moment. Verse 11, and after they came into the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they fell down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And after being warned by God in a dream not to return to Herod, the Magi left for their own country by another way. Okay, let's talk a little bit about timing. Where did the Magi go to? Was it a stable? Was it a manger? It was a house. Okay, so some time has passed. And also we know some time has passed because of the word that Matthew uses for Jesus. It's the word he uses is small child, kind of like a toddler. It's not the word Luke uses for infant or newborn. So now there's been some time that's passed. Who knows how long? I'm not sure. Scholars aren't exactly sure, but probably at least a few months. Think about it. If you're the wise man and you see the star appear where you are, the Parthian Empire stretched from the Middle East over to Afghanistan, through Iran, Iraq, through all those countries. So at their various posts, they would have seen this star appear, and it would have taken some time to vet the discovery, verify it, and then come together and, committees. Sometimes, it takes a little bit of time. I'm just saying. But they're helpful. Took some time to get supplies together, to make a decision on whether to go, who to go, probably had a military escort because that was disputed territory. Rome and Parthia didn't get along. So it would have taken time for this entourage to get over to Bethlehem, and they find the child in a house, not an infant. We don't know how long exactly it took, but when they got there, they worshiped. And the word that Matthew uses for worship here is a bowing down on your knees, face to the ground, forehead to the ground type of reverence. These kingmakers are bowing at the feet of this toddler in Bethlehem. Let's look at the gifts for a second and talk about those. 3 intentional gifts: gold, frankincense, or incense, and myrrh. Okay, why? What's the significance? What's the symbolism of giving those to this toddler king? Giving them to Jesus. Well, gold is easy to explain. Okay, often given as a tribute to royalty. It was the metal of kings. I mean, gold, we understand that one. That's easy to check off the verification box. The second one actually makes sense too. Incense, frankincense was used in worship. He was God. They're there to worship him. And Jesus in his priestly function, incense was used. And so he was not just king, he was also priest for us. And so it makes sense why they would bring incense. And myrrh, that honestly is the stumper of the 3. Congratulations on your birth of your son. Here are some spices to bury dead people. You don't take burial spices to a baby shower. That's an odd gift, right? Probably not acceptable. But they brought myrrh to give to Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. Highly symbolic gifts, but he would die for humanity. Now, they're also highly spendable. So this is literally a king's ransom that they're given here by these magi. God has an interesting way of working things out, So put a pin in that for a second, and we'll get back to that. But they give the gifts. They have been warned by God, don't go back the way you came. Now, when they had gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and stay there until I tell you, for Herod's going to search for the child to kill him. Ooh. So Joseph got up and took the child and his mother while it was still night and left for Egypt. He stayed there until the death of Herod. This happened so that what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet would be fulfilled. Out of Egypt I called my son. It's a reference to Hosea 11:1, by the way. So I love what you see here out of Joseph. We don't know much about Joseph. I would love to have more information about Joseph, right? Every time we see him interacting with any kind of divine being like an angel or God telling him in a dream, we see Joseph responding immediately in obedience. What a faithful, obedient, God-fearing man Joseph was. I mean, in the middle of the night, got up, took Mary and the baby and went to Egypt, living there as foreigners. Well, how hard would it have been to hide in Egypt? Actually, honestly, not very hard. There were a lot of Jewish communities in Egypt, especially around Cairo. So it wouldn't have been hard for them to hide in plain sight down there. In fact, if you think about it, it's kind of cool to think about, but Jesus as a toddler, as a very young child, while they lived down there for a couple of years, Giza is near Cairo, and that's where the Great Pyramids are. So it's very likely they would have seen the Great Pyramids while they were hanging out in Egypt. But how in the world are we going to survive down in Egypt? Well, the gifts, remember, were highly symbolic, but highly spendable. God funded their exile through the Magi. Multiple things can be true at once. They worshiped, but they also funded, and that's a very beautiful thing. No time to waste. I mean, Herod's going to be aware of what's going on. He's going to realize he's been tricked. So let's see how Herod reacted. By the way, spoiler alert, it's not good. Okay. Verse 16, then when Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he became very enraged. Today, you might say he was big mad. He became very enraged and sent men and killed all the boys who were in Bethlehem and all its vicinity who were 2 years old or under, according to the time which he had determined from the Magi. Then what had been spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted because they were no more. Herod, the deceiver and the manipulator, had just gotten played. His plan A was gone. Plan A was a simple assassination. One kill. Plan B was more brutal. Plan B was wipe out anyone who could be in that age range in the vicinity of Bethlehem. There's a renowned, he's passed now, but William F. Albright was probably the most renowned American archaeologist of Israeli history in the 20th century. And Albright said, probably in his estimation, Bethlehem at that time had around 300 people living in it, which would have put 6 or 7 boys in that range, victims of the slaughter. It would have been, if Joseph had stayed, it would have been very, very hard to hide somebody like Jesus in that population. So again, Joseph jumped out of there, ran down. Herod was furious. You know, and you say, how could Herod do that? I mean, horrible human being, granted, but how could he kill these kids he didn't even know? He killed 3 of his own sons. He killed one of his wives. He executed multiple family members. So 6 or 7 people he didn't know, that's easy for him. One of his boys later actually slaughtered 3,000 people when he came to power. We'll read about him in a second. These are not nice people. They thought nothing of whatever it took to stay in power. And Herod was definitely part of that. But let's look at verse 19. When Herod died, so there's a little bit of maybe a glimmer of hope here. Good news. When Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. So Joseph got up, look what he does, took the child and his mother and came into the land of Israel. Joseph immediately again obeys what the Lord directs him to do. 2 years later, Herod's dead. Green light. Joseph, green light, go. Get back into the land. So Joseph immediately acts in obedience. He acts with honor. He acts with love and responds and heads that way. Verse 22, but when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in the place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Then, after being warned by God in a dream, he left for the regions of Galilee. He crosses the border and finds one of Herod's boys on the throne, Archelaus. He's the guy who slaughtered 3,000 people just on coming to power. Let's solidify things. Let's wipe them out. These are horrible human beings. He finds Archelaus is there, and so in a dream, God tells him, go to the Galilee. Now, he immediately acts on it. In the Galilee is another one of Herod's kids, Herod Antipas. Now, you know him from the story of John the Baptist. He's that Herod Antipas. But Herod was not, he lacked principles. He lacked responsibility. but he was a capable ruler, okay? It's not a rousing endorsement when the best thing someone can say about you is, he's not as bad as his brother. That's not a stunning endorsement. But that's Herod Antipas, and he was the leader of the tetrarch over the Galilee. And so we see in verse 23, they left for the regions of Galilee in verse 23 and came and settled in a city called Nazareth. This happened so that what was spoken through the prophets would be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. So Jesus, Joseph, and Mary have come full circle. And interesting here, the prophets who said he will be called a Nazarene, what fulfillment of prophecy is that? Where is that? It doesn't appear to be a direct prophecy about that. It could be a reference to Isaiah 11:1, where it talks about the stump or the root of Jesse, a branch or shoot coming out of the stump of Jesse. The Messiah would be, and the Hebrew word for branch or shoot is nezer. So maybe Nazarene comes from that, perhaps, but that's only one prophet. Isaiah is only one prophet. And it says here clearly, Matthew says prophets, plural. So what could it be? It probably is the fact that the Messiah was talked about having despised character and being scorned by people. The Messiah was going to be scorned by people and have despised character. That's probably what it's talking about. There are multiple examples of prophecies talking about that aspect of the Messiah. I mean, goodness, even in the first century, so the calling of the disciples, Philip goes, one of Jesus' first disciples, Philip goes and tells Nathanael, and he says, hey, Nathanael, I found the Messiah. I'm paraphrasing. I found the Messiah. He's amazing. You got to meet him. He's from Nazareth, and you're not going to. And Nathanael says, whoa. Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth? The Roman garrison was there. They were not highly thought of. But that's John 1:46, by the way. You can fact check me on that. Please do. But that's a good story, too. I love these stories. But he says, can anything good come from there? Maybe that's why it says, Matthew says, that he would be called a Nazarene. So Magi and Kings. We've covered a lot of ground this morning. The Messiah's first coming. First advent. You know, there are also some stories about the second coming. What scholars believe is prophecy to the second advent of Jesus, the Messiah. And many scholars believe that Isaiah chapter 60, verse 6 is one such prophecy. A multitude of camels will cover you, the young camels of Midian and Ephah. All those from Sheba will come. They will bring gold and frankincense and proclaim good news of the praises of the Lord. For Jesus' second coming in the end times, gifts are going to be brought then as well, just like the first time. But it's just like the Magi's gift, except they're missing one. Which one? It's myrrh. Why don't they bring myrrh to the second advent? Because Jesus will not be dying again. He will not die again. He's already died once for all. Born in a manger so long ago, Son of God, lived a perfect life, died on the cross for our sins, for all humanity, raised again on the third day in victory over sin. He doesn't need myrrh anymore. And if we put our faith and trust in him for our salvation, we can have eternal life starting now and when we're with him forever. Let's pray.